the term friend is evolving, isn't it? 50 years ago, 60 years ago, when you talked about friendship, it was probably a pretty narrow, small group of people. Most people grew up in an area, they stayed there for their whole lives, they went to school, they worked, you didn't move house too often, and so your friends were the people that you interacted with on a daily basis. They were your neighbours, they were your relatives, they were the people you'd went to school with, and your friendship circle was pretty defined and pretty narrow, and you had a lot of good friends who you maybe had ups and downs with through life, but you could have maybe journeyed the whole way through life with people. And as we even just think about the funerals of some of the more elderly people, when you go to a funeral of somebody who's 80 or 90, as some of us have recently, you realize that these people have been friends for years and decades with people, but the world is changing. People are much more mobile than they used to be. People move around, they travel, they live in different countries, friendships come and go, and not only that, but with the advent of technology and social media, that has totally changed the definition of friends. The average person on Facebook has 328 friends. Now, right now, some of you are comparing yourself to that. What was that? No, but apparently the older you get, the less it is. That's true. I'm not being rude, but it's true. That the younger you are, the more you're likely to have, and the older you are, the less you're likely to have. It's just reality. So yeah, your 326 isn't so bad. But yeah, we call people friends. We talk about Facebook friends, and what makes them a friend? You click the button. They added you, and in guilt you added them. And then when you get sick of looking at their posts, you either unfriend them or you just hide them because you don't want, and that's what we have started to define friendship as. But friendship is really, who knows you, Like, who really knows you? That's the question. Who knows your heart? Who knows the secrets of your heart? Who do you do life with? Who do you allow to see into your private world? Because we live in a world where we spend more time looking at screens than we do looking at people. And even when we're looking at screens, we're looking at people on screens. Isn't that right? Like we scroll through people's lives and we think we know them. And there's some wonderful, there's some wonderful benefits of this, okay? I'm not knocking this. It's a lovely way to keep in touch in an informal way with people. And very often I'll meet somebody who I haven't seen in a while, but I know what's going on in their life because I've been stalking them on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. And I'm able to say, oh, I see you got a new job, or I see you've had a kid. And I go, how do you know? I saw it on Facebook or I saw it on Instagram. And there's something lovely about that. And the church needs to utilize that. And we do. We utilize technology. And we shouldn't shy away from that. I get emails probably every other week from people across the world who listen to our podcast. Hello to you, by the way, if you're listening. I got an email just a week and a half ago from someone in the States who had said that the talk I'd done 2 weeks ago on gratitude had really spoken to them. And I was amazed that people in the States are listening to what we're doing here in wee Craigavon. So it's created incredible opportunities for us, but it also creates all sorts of problems. We were chatting earlier in the week about how, if we were single today, right, it would be a nightmare. Because, if the technology today, particularly for Becky, okay, because Becky had a lot of boyfriends, okay? I kept myself single until I met her. No, but we were being serious. We were saying, when all you have to do is swipe right or swipe left to make a decision about whether you like somebody or not, like that choice, that the enormity of that choice is bound to create all sorts of problems. Like, options are good, but too many options are bad, okay? Too many options get you into trouble, and they confuse you and you confound you to the point where you're always going to be thinking, maybe there's someone better. That person was great, But if I keep swiping, maybe there's somebody better out there. And so it has caused all sorts of problems as well. And yet, relationships are so important. Somebody said, like, your friendships and your relationships are like elevators. They either bring you up or they bring you down. And we are created for connection. We're created in the image of a God who himself is community. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. God exists in relationship, and God made us in his image and likeness. And he made the earth and he made the animals. He said, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good. And then he made Adam and he said, it's not good. What's not good? It's not good for man to be alone. And so he created Eve. And I would say, but Adam wasn't alone God. He had you. Adam had perfect intimacy with God. And yet even God knew that there are some needs within the human soul that even God can't meet. And so he created Eve. And that's not just about marriage. It's not good for people to be alone. We were created for relationship. We were created for connection. We're wired for intimacy. And when we don't get that, something is depleted in our souls. Something happens. What's the worst punishment they do in prison? They put you into solitary confinement because they realize that there's something within the human soul that was created for connection. We are wired for relationship. We need other people in our lives. We need people to speak into our lives. We need people to share our lives with. Otherwise, we become weird. And we need them to varying degrees. I just have 4 or 5 initial thoughts that I just jotted down as I began to think. And these aren't in the text. We're going to get to the text in a minute. But just some initial thoughts that I thought would be helpful about relationships that we need to bear in mind. Just some things I have learned over my 27 years of life. And the first one is this. Some people have more of a need for friendship than others. That's just the reality. Some people place a high equity on friendships and relationships, and they're really important. And for some people, they're not so important, and that's okay. We all need relationships to varying degrees. But some people really value relationships. Some people invest a lot in relationships, and for some people, they're not that important. Some people want friends around all the time. Every night of the week, every free moment, they want to be with people. For me, that's a nightmare. I don't have that need. I am a hermit, folks, okay? I am an introspective hermit. You know the way you do those love languages when you're doing marriage preparation? My wife looked at me one day and she said, Craig, yours is personal space. That is not one of the 5 in the book. But it's true that I would be very happy to sit in a room with books for not for the rest of my life. I'd like to crawl out now and again. But anyway, but I'm a happy hermit. And sometimes people who have more of a need for relationship, I come across as rude because, and I don't mean to, but I don't have a high degree of need for that. And as long as I've got my wife and my son and a few other friends around me, I'm happy. You know, my theory is I've kind of got enough friends at this stage, and I'm happy. And I don't have a high degree of need for relationship, but other people do. And so I need to respect that, but they need to respect those who don't. And that's okay. And so I think it's okay just to understand that your need for relationship, your need for friendship will be different than somebody else's. We even see that in couples. I meet couples all the time. And very often, actually, it's the husband who is a bit like me. He's the hermit. He just wants to stay at home and, you know, be in his garage doing his thing. And his wife wants to be out socializing with friends. And they have to reach a compromise on that. You have to find some way of balancing that. So that's the first point. Is just some people have, and already you can recognize that in yourself. Some of you have more of a need for a relationship than others. And that's okay. Wherever you are on that scale, that's okay. But leading on from that, don't try and force relationships. You know, sometimes on Facebook you'll see something like, and I hate this, somebody will post, I want to see who my real friends are. Have you ever seen those posts? So if you're my real friend, what I want you to do is I want you to write the first time we met. They're deleted automatically. They're unfriended at that point because that is just guilt, manipulation, and neediness, and it's not nice. And if you do that, I'm not even going to apologize to you right now. Just stop it, okay? Because relationships are organic and they're natural, and you cannot force or guilt people into relationships. If you're in a relationship out of guilt, that is not the right reason to stay in it, okay? We don't do guilt. We do relationships because there's something that has bonded us and connected us, and we want to spend time with each other. It's not one person making all the effort and one person feeling pressure because they don't want to offend the other one. For some of you, that's liberating enough right now. You have got your money's worth this morning from just that. The third thing is this: relationships change over time. Relationships change over time. Why? Because people change. And situations change, and life stages change. You know, I lived with two guys at university in my 20s when we were bachelors called Keith and Ivan. And we had a great time. But Keith and Ivan, like myself, they were my two groomsmen, or my two ushers at my wedding. You know, they're both married with Ivan has one kid and Keith has three, I don't know. It feels like 14 when you're at their house. But they don't listen to this. We'll do the second service in the podcast this week. But imagine if I were to call Keith and Ivan and go, guys, let's go to Magaluf in July for 2 weeks, just the three of us. You know what I mean? Like, guys, seriously, let's go to Magaluf for 2 weeks. Like, and be all upset and offended because they don't want to go. That would just be weird. Because our relationship has changed. You know, we see them and we love hanging out with them, and we catch up with them probably every 6 months or so, and we absolutely love hanging out with them. They honestly are two of my dearest friends, but I don't feel the need to see them every other day because the relationship has changed over time, because we have changed and life has changed. And some people change over time more than others. And if you've had a long-term friendship, and I was talking to somebody even just in the past week about this, that you've had a long-term friendship and they have changed a lot and you haven't. That relationship changes. If they have changed their morals, if they have changed their values, if they have changed just how they live their life, and you haven't, you've kept your morals and your values or whatever that is the same, that relationship naturally changes. And if you try to force that relationship back into the hole and the mold that it used to be, that's just not going to fit anymore. And it's going to create tension. And there's times when we have to actually understand, and I'll talk about this later, that actually a relationship just has come to an end. That we need to exit gracefully. That we're trying to hold on to something that actually was really good back there. It's like food in your fridge. It was really good at one stage, but it's now out of date, and it's actually going to rot everything else if you try to hold on to it. So, and then leading on from that, some relationships are seasonal and some are for a lifetime. And I think that's really important to understand, that not everybody comes into your life as there for life. Some people come into your life for a season. And while they're there, you're thankful for them. They're a gift from God. They impact your life, you impact theirs. They move you on in life. They bring something to your life. And then one of the two of you move on, and that's okay. Some relationships are seasonal, and we're actually going to see that with David and Jonathan today. That Jonathan came into David's life for a time and a season and called something out of David, began to stir up that call of kingship within him. But then there's a time when Jonathan exits his life and David has to move on. And I think it's okay. It's okay when people come into your life for a season and they move on. Then there's other people who you'll do life with forever. There's some people who you can't imagine won't be in your life. There's some permanent and long-term relationships. But I think if you try to make a temporary relationship permanent, it doesn't really work. It's not helpful. When we try to put pressures on relationships that they were never strong enough to sustain, then they crumble. And so just recognize that, you know, even for me, I have recognized that there's people I've met over the years of ministry that were important for a season of ministry. But when I've moved on from a particular place, that relationship was contextual. It had a purpose at a time, but it's no longer there anymore, and that's okay. That's okay. And number 5, and this is helpful, I think, for some of us in church. I think it's helpful for everybody in church, actually, especially those in any form of leadership, but we're all leaders in different. Recognize the difference between a friendship and a ministry. This is important. And there's an overlap between both. Sometimes you will minister to friends, okay? So I'm not saying there's a clear line, a clear wall between them both and you don't ever cross it, okay? Sometimes we will always minister to friends, actually, and we should. But we need to recognize that there are people who are your ministry, who your sole purpose is to help them, to encourage them, to help them through a stage of difficulty of life, whatever. And that's what the relationship is built on. Other people are friends, and they're people where there's a mutual benefit to both of you. And I think it's really important that when somebody is in a ministry, that you keep boundaries within that, and that you understand that you are there for a season to help them through that. But you're not always going to be their best friend. And once that season of ministry finishes, once you try to, if they, one of you try to maintain a friendship when it actually was a ministry, that again places a pressure on the relationship that it's not able to sustain. And again, I think about my own life. When each place we have moved on from Shankill and Lurgan to Dublin, we've had relationships that, quite honestly, people have tried to sustain. And a few of them we have because they were genuine friends. But a lot of them, quite honestly, the relationship was minister to congregation. And that's just the way it is. And it's awkward because they're texting you and saying we're going to, we want to hang out. And we were never in that place. I saw it as a ministry role and they saw it as a friendship role. And sometimes that's very hard to define. But I think it's just really important sometimes to realize Paul Scanlon, Charlotte Gamble's dad, it used to be, it's funny now that you say it like that, it used to be Charlotte was Paul's daughter, and now everybody knows Charlotte Gamble but doesn't know Paul's. He had this talk years ago at Impact. He said relationships are spatial, not special, spatial. They take up a space in your life for a certain time, and it's important to understand what space in your life that relationship has. And not to try to create it to be something than it's not. So they're just some pointers that I have found helpful as I've thought about my own relationships. Because sometimes, again, we try to make something that it's not. And then we wonder why we have tension in relationships when actually the tension doesn't need to be there. If we were actually to be able to step back and go, actually, no, that was a temporary thing. Let's not try to make it permanent. So I'm going to look at Jonathan and David, and I'm going to look at love, loyalty, and loss. But I'm actually going to begin with loss and then move through the other two and then finish with loss. We talked about Saul. Saul became the first king of Israel. Tall Saul, remember, he was impressive. He was a head above everybody else. He was Israel's first king. He looked physically impressive. He was big on the outside, but he was small on the inside because he had 3 major character flaws. He was insecure, he was a people pleaser, and he was proud. Insecurity, people pleasing, and proud. When you find someone who's got all 3 of those, quite honestly, they're hard to be friends with. But Saul initially didn't want to be king. Remember when they went to find him, he was hiding among the baggage. But eventually he stepped up and he was anointed as king. And he did well to begin with, but over time his insecurity, his people pleasing, and his pride got in the way. He didn't ever deal with them. And so eventually he disobeys God. He begins to do things in his own strength. He begins to do things without asking God. And God eventually just goes, actually, Saul, I've rejected you as king. That's what he says. Look at 1 Samuel 15:26. Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you as king over Israel. The Lord has rejected you as king over Israel. God anointed you, God appointed you, but now God has rejected you. It's amazing how, for someone who didn't want the job, he now will do anything to hold on to the job. For someone who hid because he didn't want this role, he's now clinging on to it for dear life and continues to cling on to it for dear life, even though God says it's no longer yours. He's clinging on to something that God is trying to prise his fingers off. And we see that in life, don't we? People who maybe didn't want a role, didn't want a position, and yet once they get into it, their identity gets formed around it. Their security gets formed around it. They like the position, they like the title, they like the power. And they won't let it go, even though God's favor has lifted off it, even though God's blessing has lifted off it. And it actually says the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and yet he kept, you know what? He was king for another 10 years. Like, that was hard work. To try to do what, to lead God's people without God's pleasure, without God's favor, without God's anointing. It had to be just his own ability. It had to be just his own strength. It was his own natural giftedness. What if he had just stepped aside? What if he had just resigned? What if he had abdicated the throne? What if he had said, okay, God, you gave me this job, you've taken it away, you must have somebody else. That would have saved him so much heartache and so much trouble. But no, he couldn't let it go. In fact, he's determined that anyone who tries to take it from him is a threat that must be destroyed. Because, like I say, his identity and security is now in his position and title. And when you try to cling on to something that God is trying to take out of your life, whatever that is, whether it be a ministry, a job, a relationship, a dating relationship when I say that, a hobby, when God is trying to get something out of your life and you are clinging on to it, you are forfeiting something of the future God has for you. You're actually rejecting something that God has for you in the future because you won't let go of the present that God is trying to get out of your hands. Some of you have heard me use this illustration before. 11 years ago at this time, we were joking about it the other day, Becky and I were baboing. A few of you know what that is. A few of you are like, has he just used a rude word in church? Okay. We were baboing daily, folks, sometimes twice a day. Yeah, I know. You have no idea. Bebo was the pre-Facebook for all you dirty-minded people out there, okay? It was the pre-Facebook. There was MySpace, then there was Bebo, then there was Facebook. By the way, Facebook's 15 years old now, but this was 10 years ago. 11 years ago, we were this time of year, it was July, August, we were Beboing every day. We were messaging each other every single day. We had never been on a date. We had both previously been in relationships. I had been in a 2-year relationship with a lovely girl before I met Becky. And it was one of those relationships that she was a great girl. It was one of those relationships that wasn't bad enough to break up, but wasn't good enough to move forward. And so it was always in kind of limbo. And when you're in something like that, you're kind of on the lookout, okay? Just being really honest. Like, you don't want to be on your own on a Saturday night, and this isn't bad enough to break up, but you're kind of on the lookout because you know that you're not going to spend the rest of your life with this person. And so for basically quite a while, I had been in this limbo place. I had been, and I knew this wasn't the girl for me. And like I said, she's a wonderful girl, but I knew that she wasn't the one for me. But I was holding on to this. And there was a girl in Shankill, Laura Stevenson. She's married now. She's Laura Green now. And one day she came to me, and she said, and the Stevenson girls are all prophetic actually. And she said, Craig, God showed me something. He showed me that you were holding on to this relationship, and because your fist was closed, he couldn't give you the person he had for you. But if you were to release them, he would give you the person he has for you. Now, that's risky. I'm thinking, could he not swap? Can we not do an immediate exchange? Because if I let go and there's nobody there, I'm on my own at that point. But actually, I had to take the risk. And And I let go of that relationship, and we went our separate ways. And probably within 2 to 3 weeks, a month, Becky and I had started making contact with each other, had started emailing each other, messaging, babying each other. And we had our first date after 2 months of Bebo at the end of 22nd of August, 11 years ago. We had our first date. That was the 22nd of August, 24th of December, we got engaged. And the 26th of September, we got married. So almost just within a year, we went from first date to marriage. What if I hadn't been willing to let go? What if I'd been trying to cling on to something that I knew God was trying to prise my fingers off? I would have forfeited something of my future. And I think that can apply to many areas of our lives. That when we try to cling on to something God is trying to get us to let go of, that we are actually not entering the good thing that He has for us. God may even have given you the thing in the first place, and it was a good thing when He gave it to you, but now the grace has lifted off it. Maybe God gave you a ministry, He gave you a gift in the church, He gave you a role or a title or a position or whatever that was, or a job outside, or whatever that was, and at the start there was blessing and favour of it, but now it's reached its expiration date. And God's favour and God's hand has lifted off it, but you're still doing it. And there's no favour on it anymore. And actually, you're just clinging to it because maybe you like having the title or the position. Maybe you are afraid of letting it go because there's nobody else to do it. And all of those are fair enough reasons. But we have to trust two things. We have to trust that if God is asking us to let it go, that there is something or someone else for us. And the other thing we have to trust is for the other person or the thing we're letting go, that God has got someone for it. That other girl very quickly met her husband and is married now as well. So not only by holding on to her was I forfeiting our future, but if I'd have kept holding on, I'd have been forfeiting her future as well. Because God always has a backup plan. And we see that with David. Saul didn't know this at the time, but God had a backup plan. Secretly, Samuel had gone to Jesse. They brought out the 7 brothers. No, it's none of them. There must be another one. David's brought in and he's anointed with oil. He's anointed to be the next king of Israel. He's been selected. He's this unknown shepherd boy who spends his days under the hot sun looking after smelly sheep. And all he does all day is basically, he looks after sheep, he plays the harp, he sings songs, and he fights off lions and bears. Little did he know all of those things were preparation for what God has for him. God was preparing him in private, developing him in private for what would soon become public. Because here's another relationship principle. Who we are in private always comes out in our relationships. Who we are when nobody's looking always seeps in and overflows into our relationships. If you have a secret area of your life that your spouse, that your partner, if you're dating, doesn't know about, that will seep into your relationship. That will affect, and they'll not understand why some days you're moody and angry and up and down or whatever it is, but there's something hidden in your life because it's our secrets that make us sick. It's our secrets that destroy us. It's the secret areas of our lives that Jesus is in Lord. And so when you have those secret areas, you will find that there will be problems in your relationship, and you'll try to attribute them to other things when actually it's what's going on inside you. And if you don't deal with the private areas inside you, if you don't deal maybe with those sinful areas, with those habits, with those things, then you will constantly find yourself coming up against the same relational issues again and again. But it's amazing when you're actually willing to get to the root of some of those problems instead of trying to constantly deal with the fruit. Then you'll find that you won't have the same relationships. You see, for relationships to work, they need honesty, transparency, and vulnerability. Honesty, transparency, and vulnerability. Real relationships, like. I'm not talking about Facebook friends, okay? I'm talking about real, committed friendships and relationships. Honesty, transparency, and vulnerability. We need to be able to expose something of ourselves, what's in our hearts. And we can't do that without trust. David, when no one was looking, when no one was watching, was worshiping God. When no one was looking, he was fighting off lions and bears. He was protecting his father's sheep. He was being faithful in the small things. And so when this Philistine weapon of mass destruction called Goliath steps up, David's ready. David's prepared. Even though he's a nobody who nobody has noticed, he's been prepared behind the scenes because private devotion always precedes public promotion. Private devotion always precedes public promotion. And so David arrives on the scene with his bread and his cheese for his brothers. And he says, I'll take him on. And we know the story. He kills the giant, spoiler alert. And we spent 6 weeks on it, so if you don't know that by now. And then we come to the aftermath. Let's look at what happened immediately after that. He gets noticed, but then let's go to the slide that says love there, Mal. As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Okay, so Saul recognizes there's something special about this young guy. He's done Saul a huge favor because nobody was willing to fight this guy. And the only one who should have been fighting him was Saul. And Saul didn't want to. So Saul recognizes that David is useful. Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Saul's son Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. Jonathan stripped himself off the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, even his sword and his bow and his belt. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war. And this was good in the eyes of all the people and also in the sight of God's servants. Jonathan, Prince Jonathan, Saul's son, he appears one place before this. And that's in 1 Samuel 14. When Saul and the men are hiding because they have no weapons and the Philistines are coming against them. And Jonathan says to his armor bearer, remember that story? Why don't we go up? Why don't we go up and take them on? Why don't we go up and fight them? And it says that he killed 20 of them that day and Israel got a victory. So sometimes some people want to paint Jonathan as a little bit effeminate, that he maybe had a bit of a crush on David, that, when you read some of the language here, it can make us a little uncomfortable. And some people have tried to read into this something that's not there. I want to say to you that Jonathan was no wuss, okay? He was courageous, he was brave, he was a fighter, and he was a warrior. He was the Conor McGregor of his day with a little bit more humility, okay? This guy was I was going to say a bad, but he was a tough guy. Like, he was the sort of guy you didn't mess with, okay? I mean, he climbs up a hill where there's 20 people at the top and he kills them all by himself, okay? This is not some wussy, effeminate guy, okay? This is a tough guy. What is David? David's a tough guy. David's the guy who took on Goliath, the one that everyone else was scared of. So that's what bonds these two. I mean, David's from the country, Jonathan's from the city. David's poor, Jonathan's a prince. They have nothing else in common apart from that they are both courageous, they're both valiant, they're both more concerned about God's glory than their own protection. That's the commonality. There's always some commonality that binds people together, isn't there? When you think of your friends, what's the commonality? Sometimes it's physical, that they live close to you. Sometimes it's hobbies. Sometimes it's that spiritual. It can be anything, but there's a commonality that binds friendships. And for them, it was that they were both warriors. David and Jonathan formed a unique and a special bond. Look at what it says. They made a covenant with each other. You'll have lots of companions in your life. You'll have lots of mates and pals and buddies and social media friends. But you'll have very few real friends. In your life, honestly, you'll probably, if you're really fortunate, you'll have 2 to 3 really good friends. like this. 2 to 3 really good friends who are not just fair weather friends, but who are committed and covenantal friends. Look at what Jonathan does. He takes off his robe, he takes off his belt, he takes off his sword. Don't miss the significance of this. Remember what the robe meant. It meant, remember when Joseph had the robe? Remember when the prodigal comes up? The robe was a sign of authority and sonship. He's basically, what Jonathan's doing here is he's taken off his royal garments and he's given them to David. He's saying, I see the royalty in you. He sees the kingship in David long before anyone else does. And who's next in line to become king? Who's Saul's son? Who's the natural heir apparent to the throne? It's Jonathan. He should have been threatened by David. He should have been trying to take David out, and yet he recognizes that actually there's something in this young man, and I'm going to call it out of him. I'm going to speak it over him. I see kingship on him, and therefore I'm going to submit and surrender my right to kingship. I'm going to sacrifice my right for his good, because real friendship always involves sacrifice of some kind. Real friendship always costs something. Real friendship costs inconvenience. It costs time. It costs money. I wonder if you went in friendship and you were in hospital, or if you went in Facebook and you were in hospital, how many of your Facebook friends would come and visit you? If you needed £500 to pay a bill, how many of your Facebook friends would cough up? Real friends are the people who are willing to be inconvenienced for you. They're the people who see what God has put within you and they call it out. They're the people who see the treasure in the clay pot. Look at chapter 23, what it says. Where is it? I thought I had it there. Basically, no, I don't. Basically, Jonathan says to David, I know you're going to be the next king. I'll be number 2. That takes so much character and confidence in God. To be willing to say, I'm willing to submit my agenda. Because we have a society where it's all about rights. My rights. I want my rights. It's my right. It's my right to equal pay if I'm a female football player, even though... Anyway, it's my right. That is not a right, okay? Look at the figures. That is not a right, okay? But it's all about our rights. We're all about our rights. You know what? We follow someone who gave up all his rights. We follow someone who surrendered his rights. Yes, there are times when we need to fight for what we believe. But you know what? When it becomes about our rights rather than his kingdom and his purposes, there's something actually going really wrong in our hearts. Alan Scott, who used to lead the Causeway Coast, he says this: look for people who want what's in your heart, not what's in your hand. Because there's lots of people who want what's in your hand. Look for the people who want what's in your heart. Some people only want you for what you can give them, not what is actually in your heart. Jonathan was willing to sacrifice. Oh, I'm not going to get anywhere near here. You know what? I'm going to hold it because there's so much more I want to say about this. We need people who care about us and our well-being as much as they care about their own. And we need to be people who care about others as much as we care about ourselves. We need people who are committed to God's plan for our lives. And we need to be those people for others, even if God's plan inconveniences us. In a world full of shallow, superficial friendships and relationships, God has called a covenant community together. People say blood is thicker than water. Can I say to you that we aren't united by family blood, but we're united by Christ's blood. And that's thicker than any water or any other blood. And that there's something within a covenant community that we're committed to each other, not on the basis of us all agreeing about everything, because we won't. We're committed to each other not because we even like each other, but because God has called us together and we love each other. And ultimately, who you become in Christ and who I become in Christ is in large part determined by the relationship we have with each other. But ultimately also it's to do with our relationship with God. I want to finish with a story of friendship. I read it yesterday about a young man called Joseph Scriven. He was born in Banbridge in 1819. Grew up in Banbridge, went to Church of Ireland in Banbridge. He was due to get married to a young woman when he was in his late teens, early 20s. They'd been together for a few years. The night before the wedding, she was coming across the River Bann, one of the bridges in the River Bann. He was at the other side. And something startled her horse, and she fell off her horse, went into the Bann and drowned. And he was absolutely, this is the night before his wedding, he was absolutely devastated. So in his grief, he moved to Canada. He moved to Ontario and then to Port Hope. There he eventually met somebody else, a girl called Eliza. They were due to get married. He thought his heart had been mended. Not long before the wedding, she got pneumonia and she sadly died. And he's absolutely heartbroken and devastated. And in the midst of this, he has no money. He finds out his mother's sick back in Banbridge. And he writes her a poem. Because she's more heartbroken over his losses and over his loneliness. And so he writes her a poem. And this is the poem. What a friend we have in Jesus. All our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Can we find a friend so faithful who will all our sorrows share? Jesus knows our every weakness. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Do thy friends despise, forsake thee? Take it to the Lord in prayer. In his arms he'll take and shield thee. Thou wilt find a solace there. I thought that was a profound and powerful story. I didn't realize he was from Banbridge. But in the midst of all the heartache and grief and loss and tragedy in his own life, he found a friend. A friend who was faithful, a friend who stuck closer than a brother, a friend who was willing to give everything for him. And you know, friends come and go, but there's one friend who never changes. And I know it sounds trite even to say it, but it's true. And that's Jesus. And Jesus said in John 15, I no longer call you servants, I call you friends.